listener production.
Hey, Bension Siebert here with the briefing. Aid workers for World Central Kitchen were leaving a warehouse in central Gaza after unloading more than 100 tonnes of food on Monday night when the Israeli Defence Force bombed their 2 armoured cars and a 3rd vehicle. Tragically, 7 aid workers were killed, including Australian Zomi Frankcom. Here's how Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese responded.
Zomi Frankcom was an Australian aid worker working for the World Central Kitchen. She was doing extraordinarily valuable work, and this is just completely unacceptable. Australia expects full accountability for the deaths of aid workers, which is completely unacceptable.
Our Foreign Minister Penny Wong described the attack as an outrage. Israeli PM Benjamin Netanyahu has since accepted Israel was responsible for the killings, but said they were unintentional.
Unfortunately, in the last day, there was a tragic case of our forces unintentionally hitting innocent people in the Gaza Strip. This happens in wartime. We are thoroughly looking into it and are in contact with other governments and will do everything to ensure it does not happen again.
So will this be a turning point for Australia, for Israel and for the war in Gaza? Will these deaths lead to any concrete action, or will it just be words? And will this force aid agencies to pull back on the already limited supply of food and medicine entering Gaza as a result of these latest deaths? Reverend Tim Costello is one of Australia's leading voices on humanitarian aid and the former head of World Vision. Tim, thanks for joining us. How are you and other members of the international aid community feeling right now?
We're all feeling grief. We're feeling vulnerable. We're feeling that easily could have been any of us because World Central Kitchen had done absolutely everything right. And that's exactly the same procedures they followed that all of us have followed in conflict zones. So it's this feeling of shock and vulnerability.
You mentioned that aid workers have felt some level of confidence over decades, over the past, all over the world, that they wouldn't be targeted, or at least that there was enough in place to suggest that they were safe enough to go in. Is that confidence shaken?
Well, it really has been shaken, and it's been shaken particularly in Gaza. The UN is reporting that there have been 190 aid workers, UN aid workers, that have died in this conflict in 6 months. Now, that is extraordinary, and I have never seen any other conflict like this. And look, part of the difficulty is that people have no idea how dense in population Gaza is. When you think of wars, you think, well, there's military establishments and they're separate to where civilians live. And, armies meet and target each other's military installations, not civilian populations. Gaza is so densely populated, and I've been there, that you just know that is actually impossible in Gaza because of the tiny area size and the density of the population.
Do you have a message for the families of Zomi Frankcom and the other 6 aid workers who've been killed?
Yeah, my message to all of them is that you are, the finest, most courageous people, expressing the deepest and truest values that humans aspire to. And that this terrible loss, which should not have happened, nonetheless does not detract from the ideals that are the finest for all humans to look to and aspire to.
It's been reported that a ship with around 240 tonnes of undelivered aid will be turning back to Cyprus because of these killings. Is it likely that even less aid gets into the Gaza Strip as a result of these killings?
Yes, it is likely, and we know that children are already starving and 500,000 Gazans are at the point of famine. The response of aid agencies is our first duty is to our staff. And when a an event like this happens, you suspend operations, you recall staff, you stop the ships going in. But the knock-on effect of that is devastating for the people whose only chance of continuing to live is the shipments, the trucks of food that are going in. So the chilling effect from something like Zomi's death and these other 6 aid workers is exactly a suspension of the life-giving humanitarian aid.
We've heard for months now that not nearly enough aid is getting into Gaza, and that there's hunger, and that it's at the point of being close to famine. What does that actually mean, famine?
Yeah, famine's when 20% of the population do not have access to food security. So humans need 2,100 calories a day to survive, a bit more for men, a bit less for children and women. And if you had a food basket, that's 661 grams of food a day just to survive. And when there's a population in Gaza of 2 million, that's about 3,000 tonnes of food that have to get in there, and can only because there has been a blockade for 17 years. So there's these trucks of food and gas were going in before the war started on October the 7th. But clearly with starvation and with famine, that food, those calories just to sustain human life on a daily basis have been diminished and are not getting in there. That's what we mean.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu acknowledged that Israel was responsible for the deaths of these aid workers, but described the incident as an unintended tragedy. He said, "This happens in war." Does it?
No, it doesn't. I found that comment glib. Look, I was pleased that he said there will be a full investigation, but the comment "this happens in war" is glib. It spoke to me of impunity, of recklessness. Look, the IDF, the Israeli Defence Force spokesman, overnight actually acknowledged that World Central Kitchen were totally neutral. They'd helped Israelis, that they had absolutely done everything right in communicating, displaying logos, saying what they were doing. No, this doesn't happen. And what worries me is that when our Prime Minister calls for accountability, and the Israeli government at the moment are saying yes, an investigation, accountability will not be served if it's just a war defence. This happens in war. Accountability has to allow the very real possibility that someone will be charged. These deaths did not need to happen. They shouldn't have happened. They died needlessly in that sense because they'd done everything right. That's what worries me.
Is it easy to mistake or confuse an aid truck for something else? No. And look, this from what I've seen, this is in the area which has logged and said these are the food trucks going in. They've been checked by the Israeli military. They've been allowed to go. They're displaying the logos. No, it's not easy. As you mentioned, Anthony Albanese demanded transparency and accountability from Israel. He and Foreign Minister Penny Wong described this incident as unacceptable and outrageous. Is that enough? Should the government be taking action, not just saying words? Look, all of us have been feeling the impotence and paralysis of watching a death toll of so many innocents climbing to 35,000 with words that have sounded, as we've watched our TVs, merely mouthed that, well, Israel has a right to defend itself, and yes, it has to do it under international law. And they just don't seem to have amounted to saying too many innocents are dying. So those statements, and it hasn't just been our leaders, and to their credit, they had called for a humanitarian ceasefire. What I am comforted by is now the much stronger language.
our leaders are using. Prime Minister Albanese's call for accountability and saying he will be speaking to Prime Minister Netanyahu. Penny Wong going even further, calling it an outrage. I was really heartened by that language because I think that's what most of us feel.
So there's stronger language, but should we impose sanctions? Should we cut the supply of Australian weapons to Israel?
Well, the government denies any Australian weapons are going to Israel. If they are, yes, we should certainly cut them. If there is support we're giving to Israel, that support should be suspended till there is an investigation and accountability.
And finally, do you think this moment will be a turning point?
I'm really hoping so. I've thought this a number of times, though, over the last 6 months and proved wrong. But I do think it's now incrementally building up, with the United Nations Security Council calling for a ceasefire and America abstaining, with the demand by President Biden to absolutely consult and not go into Rafah and say that's not a solution, with so many innocent lives potentially on the line there if the Israelis go in. And now with this outrage, to use Penny Wong's words, I'm really hoping, I'm indeed praying, this is a turning point.
Aren't we all? Tim Costello, thanks so much for your time.
That's a pleasure. Thanks.
Tim Costello there. And that's all we have time for today. Thank you for joining me. The Briefing will be back in your feed from 6 a.m. tomorrow. And if you like what we do here at The Briefing, share it with a friend and hit follow so you never miss an episode. I'm Bension Siebert. See you soon.